So thank you for inviting me to come and do another update. As I always say at these updates, I'm not a medical professional. I'm a researcher. I research future trends. I try and understand how the world is changing and then help people to understand those shifts and trends and changes. And obviously over the last year or so, a lot of that focus has been on COVID. So as I say, not a medical professional, but I'm bringing you, I hope, some of the latest information. As Philip said also, please put your questions into the chat box. I've had about 6 or 7 questions already sent to me. So these are questions that you've already been asking, and that's kind of just, I'm answering those questions in this presentation. But I can see the chat box, so throw your questions in there as they come up and I'll try and answer them. Otherwise, Philip and I will have a chat together after my presentation. So first of all, let's just quickly update ourselves in terms of where we are with COVID at the moment. And just if you can't see my screen, you might want to just roll over my name, click on the 3 dots next to my name and just pin me to the screen, fit me to frame, whatever version of Teams you're using, so that you can see what I am seeing. Pretty much every country, Southern African country at the moment, is experiencing an uptick right now in terms of cases. This is the latest results I got that include, I've got there Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, and then kind of the whole of Africa combined. This is cases per million people. So Namibia, don't freak out. You don't have more infections than South Africa, but just per person, per million people. Namibia is the hardest hit country at the moment, with Botswana and South Africa behind them. And I think Zim is actually lower than Zambia, as far as I know at the moment, but I might be wrong on that. I think it's really difficult to get stats out of Mozambique at the moment. But whatever we're seeing this uptick. We know that this third wave has come. And part of the third wave has got to do with the concept of a variant, this Delta variant that you might have been hearing about. So let's talk about that. There were a few questions around what is a variant, how do they come about, etc., etc. So just for those of you who know all of this, I'll start with the simple stuff and then maybe get to some of the more detailed stuff in a moment. So every single time a virus goes from one person to another person, it changes ever so slightly. Think about having children, right? Every child in the world is a combination of the two parents and is different from the parents. And viruses are living organisms, and every time they move from one host to the next host, they engage with the cells of that host and mutate, slightly change. Most often, those changes do nothing. They're not significant enough to change the virus, but they shift. Then that person passes it on to the next, and the next, and the next, and each time it's shifting. And every now and again, a shift happens. Remember, what the virus is trying to do is get better at being a virus. I mean, that's what nature and evolution is all about. And every now and again, that crosses a line, and it actually makes the virus significantly different. Better or worse, whatever words you want to use, but it gets better at being a virus, and it makes it different. And when it significantly changes so that we have to treat it differently, maybe our current medicines don't work anymore, maybe our current approach doesn't work, then we give it a new name. And we were calling these variants after the countries in which they were first identified. So the beta variant, so we've had an alpha, beta, gamma, and delta variant. The beta variant was the South African, the alpha variant was the UK, the gamma was the Brazil, and the delta was the Indian. That's unfair on those countries, because it's not as if those variants came from those countries. It was just first identified there. The only reason South Africa got into that list is because we've got a brilliant epidemiology set up in South Africa. Some of the best infectious diseases experts in the world are based in South Africa, and that's why we identified it first. Why? you ask? Well, because of malaria, TB, not so much malaria actually, more TB and HIV. Two of the most infectious diseases in the world, and we're a hotspot for both of those. But that means we've got the capabilities to deal with COVID. Anyway, now called the Beta variant, much better that it's not named after a country. And the Delta variant is the big one. The Delta variant is now running all around the world. Scotland has just had their highest number of new cases since this began. That was on Monday this week. Russia is now in the middle of a third wave again, the highest number of cases in Moscow that they've ever had. Sydney is seeing spikes. Brisbane is in lockdown as of this morning again. New Zealand is probably going to go into lockdown again tomorrow. Malaysia is in a hard lockdown, have been for 3-4 weeks now. It's just been extended again. So this is not a South African problem, right? The Delta variant is not more deadly. So it's not as if more people are going to die. It is just much, much, much more transmissible. More people are getting this, and this is important, more people are getting sick. So you probably know this in your friendship circles, that it's not just a case of someone saying, oh, I got a positive test, I didn't even know. I'm sure a lot of people who got the Beta variant, the one that was going around in October, November, December last year, or the Alpha variant, or in fact, it wasn't the Alpha variant, it was the no variant, it was the original. If you had COVID last year, April, May, June, July, August, you might not even have known it. You might look back now and think, yeah, I had a scratchy throat for a few days, I was a bit tired, but you might not have known it. I think people who get the Delta variant know it. I've now got, it's more than 100 people I know personally who've had COVID in the last month or two, and they say it is the worst thing they've ever experienced. And some of these people have had pretty rough diseases in the past. It's rotten. And sadly, for some of them, we don't know yet, but the medical profession is concerned that about 20% of people are going to have lifelong issues related to long COVID. Simple example I can give you, basically COVID chooses, this is not medical explanation, but basically COVID chooses which part of your body to hit. Different people get hit in different ways. Some in the lungs, some in the brain, some in the spinal, some in their pancreas. And if you get hit in your pancreas stops producing insulin and you become diabetic. I've heard 3 or 4 cases, including a 17-year-old. Literally overnight, you are now diabetic. You're never not diabetic. Your body won't ever recover from that. So, anybody who's still saying, well, only 1% of people die, has not understood what's going on with this disease. About 20% of people who get COVID get very sick. And about 20% of those people may never recover. This is not the motivational part of the presentation, right? This is the part that says, make sure you don't get COVID. And this Delta variant is no joke. And that's why all around the world, this is not just a South African thing, all around the world, governments are going back into lockdown. The UK, for example, is pushing out their freedom date to the middle of July, and I think they'll push it out again. Canada going back into forms of social distancing. Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. The Delta variant is impacting children and teenagers. Previous variants, kind of young people didn't get it. Or they did get it and just had no symptoms. There are a lot of younger people getting sick. And I don't just mean 30 and 40-year-olds. When you're my age, everybody looks younger. But I'm talking teenagers and young adults. So, okay, not the motivational part of the presentation. The motivational part is we got vaccines. Now, our previous record for developing vaccines was 4 years, when a particular mumps strain came out and the World Health Organizations said, let's try and get a vaccine for mumps now. It took them 4 years to develop it. We developed a vaccine in 12 months. Now, some people think that that's a problem. Some people say, no, well, you rushed the vaccine. Let's not use it. We don't know what the vaccine will do. That's not how vaccines work. That's not how science works, right? The vaccines weren't rushed. All that happened was the barriers that are often put in the way to bringing a new medicine to the market were removed. So the word rushed is wrong. We didn't rush to market. We just focused the entire energy of the entire system on this. Now, that's a problem for other diseases. People who get cancer at the moment, in some countries, it's a nightmare because the entire focus of the entire medical profession is on coronavirus. And so, that is a concern. But it's not a rush job that we got to vaccines. We've been working on a variety of different approaches. We being the world, the medical systems of the world, have been working on vaccines. A lot of people have known that some kind of coronavirus is coming. We've had 12 major coronavirus outbreaks in the last 100 years, going all the way back to the 1918, 1919 flu. There was the Hong Kong flu of 1957, the Singapore flu of 1968. There was SARS, there was MERS. So it's not as if this was a surprise. We couldn't predict it would have happened last year, but the medical profession has known that this was coming. And so they've been creating the approach to the vaccines. Kind of, if you're a sports person, think about it this way. You don't have to know who the team is, right? So we've got this rugby series coming up against the British and Irish Lions. The coach is busy thinking in his head about his tactics. He's busy working out, what are we going to do with the scrum? What are we going to do with the backline? He doesn't know who his players are going to be yet. Okay? He's got some idea. Some of the players are in, but what happens if a player gets injured? You don't then say, well, the coach has now got to change his entire game plan because the one player is injured. No, you just replace that player. And the game plan pretty much, you might adjust, tweak slightly because the new player's got slightly different abilities, but you've got this game plan. And that's what the medical profession has got, this game plan for vaccinations. Now that we know what the actual disease looks like, we just put in the details and then we roll out the vaccine. And that's why we've been able to produce vaccines faster than before. There are 4 different types of vaccines. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but some of you asked the question. The 2 big ones that impact us in South Africa and Africa, Southern Africa, are the one type, which is Astrazeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sinovac, Sputnik. Those might be words that you heard. Sinovac is from China, Sputnik is from Russia. Those all work on what's called a viral load. And we don't need the science names. What happens is they take a little piece of the virus, a piece that won't that won't harm you, but it's a piece of the virus that doesn't already exist in your system. Typically, they take these little spikes. Those are proteins, and those spikes are how the virus digs into the cells of your body and infects you. And those spikes don't exist. The actual protein on that spike doesn't exist in your system. So they just take that little spike and they put that into your body. Your body says, what's this? What, you inject it into your arm. You say, what? What is this? I've never seen this before. Your body then goes and investigates, looks at this thing and says, we've got to get this out of our system. This doesn't belong here. It then pushes it out of your system because it's such a small little piece, your body can easily fight it. But now your body has learnt. It's learnt the game plan. If I can use a sporting analogy, we now see the game you're playing. And when the actual virus comes in, your body doesn't need to learn the game plan. Your body already knows the game plan. It says, I've seen you before, and I know how to deal with you. And that's what you call antigens or antibodies in your system. So that's the short version. The other version is the mRNA, messenger RNA, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, which is part of every cell of your body. And what we've learned how to do 20 years ago, this is not new technology. This is 20-year-old technology just applied now to vaccines. We can put a bit of code into your DNA. We're not changing your DNA. It's kind of like having a list of instructions for something. And all we're going to do is we're going to add to the bottom of the list of instructions. Your cells have got instructions. Your body's got instructions on how to create new blood, how to grow hair, how to metabolize food in your stomach. It's a blueprint for you. In fact, we can take a cell out of your body and we can recreate you. Philip, I don't know how tall you are. I'm 6'3", right? Every cell in my body knows how to build a 6'3" white man. It's part of the blueprint. What we can add to the blueprint is how to beat COVID. And so mRNA puts that information into your cell. If you never meet COVID, it never activates. So we're not changing your DNA. We're not affecting your DNA. We're not giving you a bit of a disease. I think this is the cleverer way to do it, right? There's no implications to adding to your instruction list, because it only gets used if this protein appears in your body. If this protein never appears in your body just ignores that piece of information. It's a piece of code that's only there for when you need it. It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable how vaccines work. And we've known about vaccines for more than 50 years. We know how they work. You don't have to wait for 20 years to see how it works. We know how they work. All of you who are my age have those little dots on your left shoulder here. Those are vaccines. We know how they work. We know that they fix our problems. Now, what do vaccines actually do? What's the purpose of putting vaccines in our system? It doesn't mean you won't get COVID. When they say Sputnik is 91% effective, that's the Russian one. Sinovac is about 70% effective, that's the Chinese one. The Johnson & Johnson is about 72% effective. The Pfizer and Moderna, those are the mRNA ones, those are about 85% effective. What they mean is that's the chance of you getting COVID. Or not getting COVID, sorry, not getting COVID. Still means about 20% of people, 30% of people, if it's the Chinese one, will get COVID. What we know at the moment, though, is about let me not say 100%. No scientist would ever say 100%. So let's call it 99%. 99% of people who've got the vaccine won't get the bad symptoms. And I think they actually say now 100% won't die. Doesn't mean people won't die after they've had the vaccine. People die all the time for multiple reasons. So you might have the vaccine and then die a week later, but it's not from the vaccine, right? One or two people get complications from some of the vaccines. Each vaccine has a list of things that might be complicated. Not one of those things is life-threatening. So they might make you a bit uncomfortable. They might make you feel a bit sick for a week or two. But none of the vaccines have been shown to have any complications. Now, here's a little bit of stats. This is the number of COVID-19 vaccines in development as of yesterday, the updated chart. 184 different companies and vaccines that are busy working on trying to get a vaccine going. In phase 1, which is where you do all the science stuff, you put it in a lab and so on, there are 35 vaccines already at phase 1. Good enough to go into a lab and do all the science tests. 2 have already been abandoned at that stage. When you go to phase 2, you're starting to do human trials. Small groups of people, 30, 40, 50 people at a time. There are 38 vaccines at that level. 1 has been abandoned already at that level. Phase 3 is when you do more than 10,000 people, preferably from different parts of the world, and you do trials. There are 25 vaccines at that stage. We've got 2 of them here in South Africa. Then you get to approved for use. There are 17 vaccines approved for use, okay, all around the world. In South Africa, we only have access to 4 at the moment. And then phase 4 is you have actually been evaluated after, hundreds of thousands of people have used it for an extended period of time. And at that point, you then get like you just logged in and everybody can use it. Nothing has been abandoned at phase 3, nothing abandoned at an in-use, nothing gone back where people have said, whoa, hang on, we made a mistake at previous levels. In other words, this is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant news from the science. Nobody is rushing. Every now and again, a new one becomes available to us in South Africa, and everybody shouts at the government, why are you taking so long to approve the use of this? Because nobody wants to make any mistakes with vaccines. And so far, there have been no mistakes, not a single mistake with vaccines around the world. Here in South Africa, we did have an issue with the Astrazeneca one. The Astrazeneca vaccine, which was the first one we got access to, was not that effective. It was about 52% effective against the South African variant, the beta variant. Interestingly, it's now about 80% effective against the Delta variant, which is the one we're dealing with now. So we might actually get AstraZeneca coming in again, where we said previously, yeah, it's not really worth it because it's not good enough. Actually, every vaccine has been proven to be the worse the virus has got, the better the vaccines appear to be. Interesting. Right, so 2 more points to make and then we'll go. I don't see any questions in the chat, so please throw in questions in the chat, but maybe I'm doing a good job of answering the questions you had already. But if there are more questions, throw them into the chat. So now the question is, how do we get vaccines? And if you don't mind me just a little bit, I'm going to rant a little bit. I'll give you fair warning here. After SARS was about what? 18 years ago now, if I remember correctly, 15 years ago. Massive thing, mainly affected Asia. We got it a little bit here, but not so much. It was massive news in Hong Kong, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, and Australia. And an Australian company came up with a vaccine for SARS very, very quickly. So this is nearly 2 decades ago. And the Australian government essentially declared that they were going to nationalize the vaccine. They said to this company, you may not sell this vaccine to anybody else in the world until the Australian government has bought all of the vaccines it wants to buy. Now that's insane for a private company to be under those conditions. But people who were thinking about this looked and said, if this happens at a global level, that's not a great attitude. So they created an agreement that is now called COVAX. And COVAX says a number of things. First of all, it says that rich countries shouldn't get preference just because you've got money. That vaccines for a global emergency should be distributed according to the population of your country and according to your need, not according to whether you can afford it or not. And in fact, rich countries should even put some money in so that countries who can't afford the vaccine can get subsidized or even free. And so the idea was that the distribution would happen evenly, proportionately to your population. Except when they wrote up the regulations, they messed up the language. Nobody thought to go further than what they did. The language actually says that the distribution will happen according to the orders that you place. So what did Canada do? Canada is 37 million people. They ordered 400 million doses of vaccine. America has 360 million people. They ordered over 1 billion doses of vaccines. The UK also ordered about 5 times as many vaccines as population. The EU did something similar. I think it's disgusting. I think it's unethical and I think it's immoral. And that's what our president has been talking about in South Africa, about vaccine nationalism. Because they've got money, they can just pay for more orders. Then the orders are split according to how many you ordered, not how much population you've got or the need you've got. And so South Africa now sits, we ordered 40 million doses in our initial dose. So we get 1/10 of the distribution that Canada gets. And now this is even more of a rant, but if you'll excuse me. But now Canada and America, because they've now vaccinated everybody, are now saying, oh, we're going to give donations of our extra things to Africa, as if we must now be grateful and thankful. Some of our friends and family have died while we're waiting to stand in line behind these rich people who are clearing out the shelves ahead of us, and now we must go and be thankful for them when their aid truck arrives, and all of us with our little brown African arms go and beg for their handouts. No, sorry. I'm not playing that game with the rich countries. The point now, rant over, let's get back to what this means for us as a country, is that we can't blame our government for not having enough vaccine stock. Every single vaccine that lands at Joburg Airport gets put into somebody's arm within 3 days in South Africa. The rollout is doing reasonably well in South Africa. Not wasting vaccines, we're not wasting our time. We are just waiting for stock, waiting for vaccines to arrive. And hopefully that will speed up now that the rich countries have finished their vaccinations. Hopefully we will start to get more stock, and we will also be able to access some other vaccines. So the question now, final question to ask, is about lockdown. How long will that last? I don't think there's a single chance that this lockdown will only be 2 weeks. I'm sure it will be extended to the end of July. There's no ways we will have flattened the curve. Remember, this is the point of lockdown. It's not to stop COVID. We now are absolutely clear we can't stop COVID. The reason for locking down is so that our healthcare system is not overwhelmed. If you get sick with COVID and need to go to hospital, we need to have a bed available for you. People will get sick and people will need to go to hospital. And if we've got availability for them, we can ease up our lockdown. We need lockdown, though, when we're running out of oxygen and when we don't have beds in hospital. Otherwise, people will die. If we flatten the curve, people will get sick, but they won't die. If we don't manage that curve, if that curve just goes up and up and up, people will die. That's all we're doing at the moment. We're not getting rid of COVID. I don't think we can do that now. But we are trying to make sure that people don't get sick, and very sick, and people don't die. Which means, in my opinion, the more of us who are vaccinated, the better it's going to be long term. COVID is not going away. We will not beat COVID. We will live with COVID. And to do that, now I summarize and then we'll get to your questions. We have to stop COVID being transmitted from one person to the next, because every time it's transmitted, it mutates. And every now and again, that mutation gets beyond our current approach. We can't have, the next will be an epsilon or a kappa variant. We can't have one of those variants beating our vaccines. We're in a race to use the current vaccines that are all working well. We've got to stop the spread of the disease. The race is between our vaccines and the next variant that might go beyond our vaccine's ability. And if that happens, we're all back to zero again, because then you can get reinfected, then your vaccines are not working, and then we start all over again. Do you want that? I don't know. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we stop transmission, which is lockdown, and that we make sure that we protect ourselves through vaccinations. Not everybody can get a vaccine. If you've got an autoimmune disease or you have really, really, really bad allergies, they don't recommend, but I'm talking like EpiPen, you know, that you could die if you eat a peanut level of allergies. They recommend that you seriously consider not having the vaccine, although people have had it and they just EpiPen themselves after the vaccine and they're fine. But those are the only people they've said shouldn't take the vaccine. We've got to get about 75% of people to have taken the vaccine to get that so-called herd immunity. And then we will learn to live with COVID, like we live with flu, like we live with HIV, like we live with TB. I think that's where we're heading. So I've answered all the questions that were sent to me in advance. Let's see, I see one or two people coming in here. Let me just pick up some of the questions that are in the system. And otherwise, Philip, you can help me bring in other questions. If somebody wants to raise their hand and ask the question, they can do that as well. So Natalie asked, do we have a South African vaccine approved? No, is the answer. We've got 3 South African vaccines that are in process. And I think one is at phase 2 and the other 2 are at phase 1. What we do have is Aspen, okay? Aspen Pharmaceuticals, South African company, which has massive production capabilities and facilities and do a lot of the generic drugs for the world. I mean, Aspen's huge. And Aspen has been arguing to get a license for the Astrazeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. They were granted that license a while ago. Then they started manufacturing and they were caught up in that batch of bad raw materials that caused 100 million doses to have to be scrapped. And Aspen were caught up in that. But at the moment, it looks like our best chance is for the rich countries of the world to remove the IP restrictions so that a company like Aspen, whose big COVID production is down in Gqeberha, and allow them to manufacture it for us. And they, I think, can produce like 1 million or 2 doses a month in production. So that's our best immediate chance. And then obviously there are some South African companies that are in process, but those will only be ready later this year or into next year. Okay. Yes, Natalie. Yes, sure.
The questions come in via the Q&A, so I'm just going to post them in this chat for you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes, I can't see the Q&A, so thanks for just reposting, Natalie. Thank you. I'll just take the questions as they've come in. Philip, you asked in there, things are far worse than wave 1. Why didn't the president put the country into level 5? Yeah, well, I think that we're trying to get a balance, right? The government is trying to get a balance between just shutting everything down completely and I mean, who wants to be in hospitality, entertainment, a restaurant industry? Man, it's rough. And the government doesn't have any funds left to support them. In other countries, rich countries, those companies are getting government subsidies and support, which they should get. It's not their fault that they're struggling at the moment. And I think the government is hoping that this level 4 will work. What I think should have happened earlier is they should have shut the schools. I think the wave 3 has come through the schools, and I think we saw that a long time ago. Schools that started sports again in February and March, part of the problem. It's sad. I know this. I can't imagine what it must be like to be in grade 11 or matric this year. You've been spending your whole life working to being in the first team and everything that comes with that. So I can understand. It's an Olympics year. I understand that parents in particular who love their kids being sporty kids. I'm not a sporty parent and I didn't have sporty kids, but I get it. I get that if your kid is losing out on opportunities, you're desperate for them. But hell, people, this is a global pandemic that will be remembered throughout the rest of history. Our grandchildren will be doing school projects on this and asking us what happened. And I look at the pictures of the Euros and the pictures of Wimbledon, people sitting in those stands without masks. It's mental. It's mental. We are not done with this disease yet. And so the government is hoping that lockdown 4 will work. If it doesn't work, they're going to have to do lockdown 5. I think it will work. I think we're better now than we were, Philip, is the answer. We're smarter. But your comments just before you hand it over to me are exactly right. It's in your hands. It's in your hands now what happens next. We're in level 4 lockdown now, not because the government made mistakes, but because all of you went to birthday parties, you had your fathers over on Father's Day, we're going to school sports. It's our fault. Let me not blame you. It's our fault. We've got COVID fatigue, but it's too early for COVID fatigue because it's not over yet. Okay. Is there a reason to take the vaccine if you've already had the virus? Yes, there is. Because we have no idea. Is there a reason to take the vaccine if you've had the virus? Yes, because we don't know enough yet. There's not enough research because it's a new virus. We don't know how long your antibodies last. There are people who had the virus who are getting it again. And if you had the alpha or the beta version of the virus, and you don't know whether you did or didn't, that you will get the delta again. Whereas the vaccine gives you protection against all the known variants so far. So absolutely take the vaccine, even if you've had the virus, definitely. Okay, yeah, can you get vaccinated after recovering? Okay, so yeah, I've answered that. Okay, I don't know. The question is, can you get vaccinated after recovering? Can it be done immediately? Or how long do you have to wait? I don't know. You'll have to ask a medical professional about that. I would guess you want to recover a little bit to just give your body time, unless it's the Pfizer or Moderna ones, which don't put the disease into your body. But again, ask a medical professional. I can't answer that. Do small babies get COVID? Yes, absolutely. I have a colleague who has a 5-month-old with COVID. Are there times before there's been a 4th wave of a virus? That's a great question. Most viruses have had 3 waves only. But what happens is the first wave is smaller, the second wave is the big wave, and then the third wave is smaller again. We've never had a virus that's had the third wave being the worst wave. And that's what's happening at the moment. We're ahead of the pack, right? India was the first, and you saw what happened in India. Literally bodies piling up in the streets of people dead because their healthcare system was overwhelmed. The Indian government has been horrific in their response. We are dealing with what India was dealing with, but we're dealing with it with a stronger epidemiology response from our government and from our healthcare environment and from our citizens. Slapped you over the wrists 2 minutes ago. Actually, we're doing better than some Indian people were doing and what they were doing. But now the Delta variant is in the UK, it's in Russia, and so we have to see. If the third wave is bigger than the second wave, then there probably will be a 4th wave. Unless we get vaccines, because we've also never had vaccines in the system. So kind of at this stage, kind of we're off of history. We don't know what will happen next. My husband just tested positive today. Sorry to hear that. What should be done immediately? Again, I'm not a healthcare professional, but just do it. Do a search. Get with your doctor. Get with your healthcare. I don't know. Sandvik may have protocols in place, people that they prefer you to send you to. But the first 7 days are important. And there's stuff you've got to do sort of on each day. Most important stuff, like in the first 3 days, is you take paracetamol, you do deep breathing, you've got to oxygenate, try and make sure you've got access to oxygen if you're struggling with that, sleep and hydrate, drink a lot of water. Then if you might then just recover. It might just be a headache and tiredness, and then you recover. If you start getting worse after the 3rd day, then you might want to have a look at medications there. I think it's steroids and other things that go into the system. At that point, let's just bring this up. Nobody's asked about ivermectin, but let me drop that in. Ivermectin is now approved for use in South Africa at that stage. Ivermectin is for bacterial issues, so it doesn't deal with COVID directly. You can't take ivermectin to prevent COVID. You don't take it as what they call a prophylactic. You take it only as a palliative. So if you get secondary infections, you get pneumonia, your lungs filling up with fluid, it starts hitting your stomach, your bowels, it starts hitting your kidney and your livers, then your doctor might prescribe ivermectin, not for the COVID, but to make sure that other stuff doesn't kill you. So you might want to speak to your doctor about that. But again, I'm not a medical professional, but there's a lot of good medical advice. Make sure you choose not one of the crazy conspiracy theory type websites, but get advice from someone that you trust. Is it necessary to take a COVID-19 script from the doctor and buy the meds? So the person is asking about, going to get the meds. There aren't meds. We don't have meds for COVID. So The vitamins, the paracetamol, steaming, all of the stuff you've heard, go and do that. And you do that immediately. And by the way, I would start to do that even if you feel some of those symptoms are coming on. Scratchy throat, stuffy head. Just it might just be flu. We didn't have flu last year. Flu didn't come to South Africa last year, but there is flu in the system now. And just think of it as, say, I think I might have COVID. And then you wait for your test and so on after that. Do you have any here we go, let's keep going. Do you have any recommendations about how to manage employee mental wellness? Oh man, whoever asked that question. We are dealing with deep trauma. As a society, we're going to have therapy and counseling. I've chatted about this with your Sandvik leadership team. We're going to have to, this is going to be part of what HR has to do for us in the future in terms of thinking about therapists and counseling. We're going to all need it. How do we deal with mental health? I think what Sandvik is doing, information, answering your questions, being clear, that's part of it. I think what Sandvik is doing is part of it as well, is to not put pressure on people to have to be at work. So many stories I'm hearing from companies where people say, I can't afford to not be at work. And then they become a super spreader. It's horrifying. So, you know, I think Sandvik is doing the right things and moving in the right direction. But look after yourselves, look after each other, check in with your team and with your friends. You tested positive in the first wave, and now your husband has tested positive in the third wave. You absolutely stand it. If you got COVID in the first wave, you've got, in my opinion, you've got no immunity at the moment, because you probably had the original variant, and this Delta variant your antibodies won't deal with that. Be careful. So self-isolate again. How long after you've tested positive should you expect your symptoms to clear up? That, and that, I know our time is up, so maybe that's a good place to end. Let me go back to that statement I made earlier about long COVID. We've got no idea. You will continue to test positive for COVID for about 6 to 8 weeks. So the virus will stay in your body at least 6 to 8 weeks, and that's the best case scenario. You might only feel symptoms for 3 or 4 weeks, but you might feel symptoms. My sister got COVID in October last year. She still has the symptoms, and it's still in her body. We don't know at this stage. For the 20% of people who get long COVID, you might never get rid of that COVID in your body. Again, apologies, that's not a nice thing for some of you to hear. Right. So sorry, that's a bit of a downer way to end, except maybe it's the right place to end, to say the default setting is you still don't want to get COVID. This is not a disease to mess with. The Delta variant is not more dangerous in terms of you dying from it, but it is more transmissible. More people are getting more sick from it. And we don't know how many of those people will have long COVID. Let's look after ourselves. Let's look after each other. Let's continue to take this seriously. Get vaccinated when you can. I'm 50 years and a few months old. I qualify as of today to get into that system. If you're 50 years and older, if you're in your 50s, sign up today and get that vaccine into you as soon as possible. So I hope that was useful, Philip. For those of you, again, I'm not a medical professional, so don't send me any medical questions, but I can help you with some scenarios. And if you want to follow me, maybe follow me YouTube and LinkedIn, and you'll see the updates that our team puts up on a regular basis. And you can get information that way.